reasons to host this webinar is based on our marketing, based on our understanding of the challenges listed here. And all these are from our conversation with our prospects and clients over the past years. I'm sure all or most of it's still relevant at some level within your organization if you're listening today. And from a project perspective, we know time and money and quality are critical for any successful construction project. In fact, for any project for that matter. So we understand that from our experience with our clients and in the past, experience. So today in this webinar, we hope that this would be a great session. And I'm sure there are plenty of reasons why a construction business should opt for Azure Cloud, if not already. Having said that, let me hand this over to Chris to start introducing Azure and its expertise and solutions, and from there on, Wesley Smith will be joining. Over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks everyone for joining the call today. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy people. So we're going to start kind of very high level. What is Azure? I'm sure some of you know this already, but Azure is Microsoft's version of the public cloud. As with any cloud, it's their computers and systems running in their data center that you get to leverage and rent. I think some advantages of Azure are if you have a large Microsoft ecosystem already in your on-premise world, extending that or migrating that into Azure is just a natural progression of the use of Microsoft services. Next slide, please. So, Azure has available services. You can leverage, obviously, any kind of programming language for developing applications to run in the cloud. Anything that runs on premises, for the most part, can run in the cloud. But what we find is, IaaS is infrastructure as a service. That's your standard virtual machines, switching, Linux, VM, storage, networking, things like that. All of that's available on the Microsoft Azure platform. And then there's services called PaaS, which is platform as a service, which takes individual application components and just runs those in its own specialized container. So things like web services can run independent of a server based on the type of web application it might be. You can pull your databases out of a database server and run those natively on databases in Azure. Microsoft has all kinds of tools around ETL and things like that you normally find in your on-premise environment. Those are all available to you in the cloud. And the nice thing about the cloud is if there are some interesting consumption models that you can leverage in the cloud, especially around, on-demand services. That's one of the attractive things about the cloud. I think as we talk about the construction industry, the ability to spin up servers on demand as projects require it without having to host those servers, in a trailer at a job site, I think is important. And so, Microsoft just offers that flexibility through Azure to leverage their tools for that. When we talk about adopting the cloud, Microsoft has a very prescriptive view of cloud adoption. This is their cloud adoption framework, and we encourage all of our customers and users to review this and at least think about these areas, because these are very important for success in the cloud. So the first part is define your strategy. What kind of strategy do you want to have in the cloud? Do you want to be cloud native? Do you want to have a hybrid environment where some workloads that are more on-demand workloads move to the cloud, where other heavy usage stays on-prem? Or you move your disaster recovery to the cloud, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Next is planning how you're going to leverage the cloud, coming up with an action plan, a program plan for moving to the cloud, leveraging the cloud for those workloads. And more importantly, though, understanding your current available skill set. What can your current resources do for the cloud, and do you need to upskill them or look for a partner like CapPro to help you migrate into the cloud? The ready phase is then, the training. If we're going to upskill people, we start in this training our folks, prepping virtual machines to move to the cloud. So that might be taking off some of the existing monitoring tools and things like that, because all those are available to you in the cloud. And then the adoption phase of the cloud adoption framework is to actually do the migration into the cloud. And then once you're in the cloud, start iterating on technologies and moving things out of servers, as we talked about, into the PaaS solutions. PaaS solutions are going to save you a lot of money over virtual machines. You can almost do exactly what you need to do for a lot less using PaaS services. And then once you're in the cloud too, governance and management of the cloud is really important. And having a governance model, understanding who has what roles and how you're going to assign resources to services in the cloud is really important. And then managing that cloud environment, having a plan in the cloud of, how do we do cost optimization on a regular basis? How do we do optimization of our services portfolio in the cloud? Having regular reviews of those are really important. And all of these things are services that CapPro can provide if required. Next slide. So here's just an example of some things that are available in the cloud. In addition to the Microsoft services, you have a whole marketplace of third-party vendors. You can see here, this is just an example showing Barracuda, NetApp, NetScaler, Elasticsearch, etc. All of those are services that you can move to the cloud with. So if you have existing investments in something like a Barracuda or things like a Palo Alto firewall, all those have virtual appliances available in the cloud that we can leverage. Next slide. And then if we think about ways that Azure can help improve the construction industry, Azure has a great suite of IoT tools, if those of interest to you. Microsoft has lots of solutions around collecting data from different sensors in the field and on equipment to understand kind of where your teams are as far as their equipment goes, or how they're performing in the field. And then hosting construction solutions. The redundancy and disaster recovery options are cost-effective solutions for those that need reliability. And I think we'll turn this over to Wes. Wes?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ari. So we'll talk about this slide a little bit. My name is Wes Smith. Godwin gave a little introduction. Just on a more personal note, I'm a University of Florida Gator. So if anybody's a Gator, go Gators. And let's talk about this slide a little bit. So from the construction roadmap perspective and how Azure Cloud fits into this, at the high level, the images here talk about going through the phases of project tendering, buyout, bidding, and so forth, design elements in there, which depending on contracting types could be part of the job or prior to going to bid, as we know. Then getting into the construction phase of things with the connected construction site down there, and then following along our black road there with supply chain going on during the project, and then having connected workers, and then on down to facilities maintenance once things get turned over to the owner after FF&E and things like that. So that's just the high level, but this slide also represents in the center line with our road there, and then some of the smaller dots and points in today's world, modern 2022 and the last few years, with services like Azure Cloud Services, and we're able to work through a deployment, for example, in project tendering with applications that may be relevant in that phase, and then maybe some of those drop out or get turned off using some of the elements that Chris mentioned, which are available in an on-demand situation, as users may decrease for applications in that phase, and then they may increase going on into other phases and so forth and so on throughout the project. And that's something in my career, as Godwin mentioned, going back 25 years or so with construction and technology as it's evolved, that was definitely not possible in the beginning of my career. And it's a great thing that we have at our disposal today. The other great thing is about that flow from beginning to end here is that aside from the different applications and resource management and managing loads up and down and users and these kinds of things in a more self-service way, the other great thing about this is that if depending on the type of project, again, and the type of contracting going on, for example, if it's a design build job, there may be relationships between the parties that are ongoing for many years, and they're doing a lot of the same type of project. And so depending on who is controlling or who is working to manage the Azure cloud deployment, in this instance, let's say CatPro is doing it on behalf of the parties involved, then another nice thing is that as you flow through these cycles and on into facilities maintenance, you maintain a chain of custody and similarity and similar workflow from the beginning to end, which may be a short cycle, 6 months could be, but it could be in a program with multiple projects and different entities. It could be over years, 5+ years. We see a lot of that today as well. So that's a little bit about construction roadmap and how just in terms of some of the main managerial functions of, and life cycle of a construction project, and how some of the items Chris mentioned and that data consistency and control and security and those aspects can flow through across multiple parties or within the same entities across multiple phases. So next slide, all right. And I think we're back to Chris here.
Yeah, so for hybrid cloud solutions, so this is a way you can take advantage of Azure using their hyper-converged infrastructure. That's what Azure Stack HCI stands for. The HCI allows you to leverage Azure as a management plane for your on-prem Hyper-V solutions, as well as anything you might have in Azure. Provides a single pane of glass, as well as the ability to shift workloads between your on-prem environment and Azure. You can see here it exists. It integrates with your existing data center tools, System Center, Active Directory, Group Policy, PowerShell, continued use of your investments in third-party backup, and it allows you to leverage the existing hardware you have and use that as part of your overall big cloud strategy. Next slide. Another solution for the construction industry that we see a lot of use for is the virtual desktop, Azure Virtual Desktop. This is a way for you to leverage Azure as the repository for your users to consume services that you need for them to be able to use. You can see you can leverage Windows 11 or Windows 10 in the environment. There's also a use case if you have Windows 7 legacy applications. You can leverage Windows 7 as a virtual desktop option in Azure with free extended security updates. You can bring your existing RDS services and Windows servers and desktops and apps to any computer in the world. Next slide. And then leveraging Azure for disaster recovery and backup. What we see for this solution, it's a great introduction to consuming in the cloud. What happens with this solution is you replicate your existing um, virtual machines into Azure. Everything kind of sits turned off until you're ready to exercise that disaster recovery, and then you can turn things on. But this improves recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives for your DR. You're only paying for storage until you actually have the DR events, which is great. You can do some DR testing independent of all of your other live systems, which I think is another great advantage of leveraging the cloud for DR and backup. And if you've made an investment in an existing backup and DR solution, it's easy to leverage those as well to move to the cloud. We have a number of clients I've worked with that have Veeam on premise, and Veeam works really well with Azure and storage accounts to replicate data continuously as a recovery option. Next slide. And then this slide talks to Microsoft's investment in being, maintaining compliance with, lots of different standards and legal entities. So if you're interested in things like, FedRAMP compliance, ITAR, NIST, FIPS, all of those things are available in the cloud, and CapPro can help direct you to the right solutions for leveraging Azure in the cloud for any kind of compliancy that you might need to adhere to. Next slide. I think this goes back to Wes.
It does. Thanks, Chris. So talking about a couple of the solutions built using Azure that are a bit more specific to the way that construction companies in the construction industry might need things deployed. At the top, a nice advantage with CapPro's services is they have a unified application management system as a front end. And so if some of you are used to Office 365, for example, and the application launcher there, kind of envision that in more of a homepage style launching in which you can control, have an additional layer of control of access to applications. So if you're on this call and you're coming from the IT management perspective, that can be nice to offload some of what might be traditional account creation and user onboarding, application provisioning. You can transfer some of those types of things to maybe someone at the project site, or maybe a central person in a central office who's managing applications, but they don't need to be an IT administrator. They don't need those kinds of permissions, et cetera, that might usually be oriented to those types of deployments. Okay. And then on the specific to the hosting side, just talking about some of the applications, more industry specific, there's a bit of a list there pointing out Autodesk, Trimble, Viewpoint Vista's not there, but is in the group that's currently supported. OnCenter, Oracle, to point out some industry specific names of some of the top vendors that many of you may either have applications that you need to deploy or have heard those names or worked with deploying them before. And so having some consistency in how those get deployed, being able to manage licensing centrally, those types of things, as they all come with different flavors of licensing, different resource requirements for the actual applications, especially when you get into the BIM and building design applications used by architects and those folks, and then the GPU requirements that are required. So that whole spectrum of applications there can be accommodated and is accommodated today in the Azure cloud environment. And so that's we've come a long way in that regard, in the technology landscape, and being able to go from maybe a data center with everything deployed with various hardware cards and GPU cards and all these types of things, into truly having those things virtualized and benefiting from all of the characteristics that Chris has gone through. Okay. Next slide, we'll talk about a couple of customer cases. So a few customer successes for reference, and these folks are also generally available for reference and conversations if any of you have questions or would like to talk with some of them about their experience. But a few bullets on screen and going through a few of their characteristics. Some things I like to point out that aren't on screen, for example, is the J Companies is located on the East Coast, US, and then Eames is located on the West Coast, US. So right away, they both get the same performance. So that's two different companies, but if you had different projects, if you're a national or a regional company with projects that may span geographically a fair distance, even international, a great thing about Azure Cloud Services is you can have zones and regions where different resources are deployed, and that way they all benefit from the same speed and the same characteristics that Chris has been talking about. These two customers in particular, as you can see, they've been on the hosted solutions managed by CapPro for quite some time, more than 10 years each. And they use a bit different suite of applications. Some are the same applications, but they use different accounting products, different project management products. They both have Office 365 subscriptions. One of them, it's not noted here, but they take advantage of Google Workspace and some elements. And so I think it's nice to demonstrate that you can have traditional, maybe even legacy applications deployed in an environment like we're talking about. You can have maybe current applications, like something like Viewpoint Vista, which is a current application, but it's still primarily a desktop application with a SQL backend, and you can accommodate that. And then if there's other work suites, like Google Work Suite, for example, or Microsoft Office 365 in this scenario, where everything, let's say it's deployed in a pure web browser mode, it's nice because you can have all that wrapped into a relatively seamless interface for your users to come into, for project administrators to provision applications, and then on the back end, assistance with deployment of some of these industry-specific applications, which may be different skill sets than you have at your company right now, or you may just want to focus your existing resources on other opportunities and have the maintenance and ongoing support of some of these types of applications managed in Azure Cloud, which is great. And not noted on this slide, but intertwined with some of Chris's comments, not only can the applications be in different locations or all in the same location, but you can also have on-premise, could be included in that suite, right? So you could have some things on-premise, or maybe for some reason you have some security requirements with one of the organizations like Chris mentioned, and some of those standards bodies that require a certain project to have everything in a certain type of deployment, and then you can still have some continuity with the other items that may have less restrictions or less regulations for deployment. And so, yeah, I think I covered the hot points here. And again, just to note, these are some great success stories, and maybe most importantly, as you continue conversations with CapPro, these folks are generally available to speak on our behalf from their successes with various applications over the years and their solutions today. Okay, next slide.
Thank you, Wes. Yeah, so I actually wanted to speak a little bit of CapPro in the beginning, and there was a little slide jump, so I'm taking this opportunity to speak about CapPro here for the audience, and then try to open up for some Q&A. So CapPro Technologies, we're an IT services company, but primarily focused on quality services and delivering to meet the expectations of our clients. Having said that, since 2010, CapPro Technologies has been a Microsoft partner in growing within the Microsoft expertise with Microsoft suite of products, including Azure, SharePoint, Power Automate, Office 365. CapPro has the capability and had an opportunity to expand its expertise beyond Microsoft. And today, the skill set has been catering to a lot of customers on the area of process automation, integration, and that I put together is helping achieving CATPro's customers' tick objectives. So that's a little overview of CATPro, and then some of the clients that we worked in the past. We are trying to show some names here. And any questions or any more technical insight or business insight on Azure, we can use this opportunity to talk about it. You can raise your hand, or you can just open up your mic and speak.
Okay, so I have a question. Earlier, we mentioned that one of the big advantages of Azure over some of the other public cloud services is that if the business is already using Microsoft services, which it most likely is, it's easy to migrate from Microsoft to Microsoft Azure. However, I wanted to know what other advantages does specifically Azure have over some of the other big public cloud providers?
So I would say if you have a large Microsoft investment already, you can leverage existing Microsoft licenses in Azure and reduce your cost in Azure considerably. One of the biggest expenses in Azure is licensing Windows Server and SQL Server, and all of those hybrid use licenses can be leveraged in the cloud. I think Microsoft has a larger footprint of data centers across the globe. So if you're interested in deployment globally, Microsoft has a few more data centers than some of the other bigger clouds. And it comes with an easy to use interface that a lot of your existing administrators are familiar with. You can leverage PowerShell, which is the scripting language of Windows, to do anything in Azure. So if you've got script pros already on staff that know PowerShell, extending that knowledge into Azure is something they can easily do. And I would say those are some of the bigger benefits from moving into Azure versus AWS or GCP.
Thank you.
And Microsoft has some funding programs as well for accelerated migrations. So all of those, we can help CATPro gain access to on your behalf. So if you have an interest in migrating to Microsoft Azure, Microsoft can help offset some of the migration cost for moving.
Great. Any other questions from anybody? I'll give you a few seconds, and then we'll wrap up.
So does anyone have, any existing workloads today in a public cloud? Are you leveraging any of the public clouds today? All right.
All right. We are close to the end of the session. If there are any further questions, we'll try to summarize them and send over as an email to everybody, along with a link to the recording of this webinar. We appreciate all your time. I once again thank our speakers for taking time to share the knowledge and making this webinar happen today, and the CATPro team. Yeah, that's it. So thank you all. We will follow up through